Yerekchiish, everybody.
Okay.
My name is Jason Robertson, and this is my partner, wife, Raven Dunstan. We'll be helping to facilitate tonight's community conversation. And the topic is around infrastructure and community facilities. So welcome everybody, March 11th, Parish Hall. So just a little background on community conversation. So it's a series of casual community meetings that provides focused opportunities for residents, local interests, and surrounding jurisdictions and stakeholders to provide more detail about certain topic areas. Ideas shared in each community conversation will help the village identify key policy directions and actions to be included in the updated official community plan. So this is session number 5 out of 6 planned sessions.
There's one more.
And a little bit of a presentation outline. So an overview of the community facilities, presentation by CAO Diane. And then we'll have an overview of infrastructure projects, a presentation by our village engineer, Daryl. And we'll have time for questions and conversation and comments. All right. And yeah, so Diane.
Thanks very much, Jason. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the community conversation about community facilities and infrastructure projects. We report regularly to council on these items because they've been going on for a little while. We basically have 6 sort of major projects that the village is undertaking, and I'm gonna review sort of the first 4, and then my colleague Daryl will jump in and make some comments about some of the in the ground water sewer type stuff that he's working on. So the first one is the Public Works building. So I think everybody is familiar with this down at 30 Main Street. That building is completed. The funding for that was provided by Emergency Management and Climate Readiness BC, otherwise known as EMCR, through our recovery funding grant from them. So they contributed the funding for that facility, and it was substantially complete around at the end of August. That's when we had a ribbon cutting. There was still a little bit of mechanical work to be done, so the team didn't actually move in and start using it until November. But now everybody's moved in there, and all the equipment and everything, and they're using that building every day. So the next one is the village office, and so this building is intended to be rebuilt at 380 Main Street, where the village office was prior to the fire. At that time, the village rented space from the TNRD in a building that they had at that location. When the fire happened, the TNRD had determined that they weren't going to rebuild that facility, so we arranged to purchase the property from them, the lot itself, and then have been going through a process with an architect to design a building. That actually the construction contract for it was approved at council last night for a value of $4.5 million, and that will be a 2-story building that will include retail space, the visitor center, some public washrooms, as well as kind of the village requirements, office space, council chambers, those types of things. So, and that's going to be that's funded through insurance proceeds that the village received as a result of the fire. The next project is the Community Hub. This is intended to be located over on Fraser Street, where the site of the former Totem Motel, which is a property that the village purchased, and then also where the former pool and museum were located. So you can see on the little map on the right-hand side of the slide, the 3 properties that are all highlighted on the left side. That's the location of the Community Hub. This facility is going to be funded by a grant from the Green and Inclusive Community Buildings Program, otherwise known as GICB. And the village was back in 2022, it was announced that the village was going to receive $64 million worth of funding from the federal government to rebuild facilities in the village. And part of the stipulation around that funding is they have to be open and inclusive and available for everyone. So out of that 64 million, 25.9 was allocated to this community hub building. So in the community hub, there's going to be the museum will be located in the community hub. If the TNRD library comes back, it will be located in the community hub. There's sort of a central space for people, to gather or for programming of any of the spaces in the facility. There's some multi-purpose rooms, a large gathering hall that will hold over 250 people, as well as a large plaza in the front of the building, which will kind of be on the Fraser Street side. And there in the room with you, there's some fairly large boards that show the layout and the drawing of the facility a little bit better than these little sketches on the slide. So if you haven't had a chance to look at them already, they're there on the walls in the parish hall, and perhaps you can check them out later. And then the second floor is going to be apartments, and the apartments will be available for rent, and those are being funded through again the EMCR recovery funding, an account called the Housing for Essential Services. So the next facility, so just as part of that community hub on Fraser Street, it includes the pool itself, and so the pool is being contracted separately, and we're working with the contractor who built the Public Works building to assist us in building the changing rooms and the washroom facilities, that type of stuff that's required for the pool, as well as engaging the pool contractor and doing that themselves. So that we're just undergoing sort of the proposal stage with that contractor, and then we had received some initial feedback on the pool, and we'll be going out to work with a bunch of the people in the surrounding communities who have expressed interest in participating in the design of the pool. To make sure that we incorporate as many features as we can. Just an interesting thing about the pool, when we looked at the donations that were received post-fire, we actually received $196,000 worth of donations that were designated by the donor to go towards the replacement of the swimming pool. So it's just kind of gives an indication of the amount of of support and the importance that people place on facilities like a community pool. At this point, it's too early to predict an opening because I don't want people to be disappointed if we don't make it. So. And then the final facility is the Fire and Emergency Services Center. So again, this one is funded under the GICB program, $23.1 million from the program for this. This is very in the very early stages. It is intended to be located at what's called 200 Loring Way, which is, as you can see from the map on the screen, the little triangle at the end adjacent to the cemetery. We're in the process of preparing the request for proposal for the architect. So at this point, the only work that's been done on it is we gathered some of the actual technical requirements for this type of building when we submitted our concept plan to GICB. So that included talking to Lytton Fire and Rescue and some of the emergency management personnel in the area who would be contributing information and feedback and input into the EOC. So that was done for the original concept plan. Once we get the architect on board, then there'll be sort of larger programming sessions held in the community where everybody will have a chance to get involved. I mean, a certain aspect of this building is strictly technical, and we'll be relying on the folks with that expertise. We have also been having some conversations with potential partners for some co-located facilities at this location, but not really anything that I'm able to provide any detail on at this time. So those are the four kind of buildings that are or projects that are going on, and now I'll turn it over to Daryl, and he can talk about some of the other infrastructure projects.
Thanks, Dan. So tonight, I want to talk a little bit about the existing water and sewer infrastructure. I want to talk a little bit about the work to date and also the planned work that we have upcoming that we have approved. So on this map, you can see the general extents. This map generally shows the complete extents of the water and sewer system. Some highlights. Most of you are probably familiar with the system, but in terms of water supply, yeah, the water is typically taken off of Lytton Creek, and there's also 3 community wells. 2 are operational. We'll talk a bit more about that a little bit down next couple of slides. It's a 2 pressure zone system. So we have a lower pressure zone that's serviced by a 265 reservoir that services the lower village, and the water treatment plant. It's near the 345 zone. It services the Loring Way area and all the way down to the school and Kent Road. So in terms of projects, going back to about 2023, work started with a repair on River Road with a water main replacement. So since that time, in 2024, we designed a couple of additional projects. That was the sewer main down on River Road, as well as all of the east of Main waterworks, and a little bit of sewer main up on 4th and Alonzo was completed. In 2025, that construction was completed, and we started into design work, rather a large project for the west of Main sewer works. And that includes sewer all the way down Center Lane, up 6th, and connecting back at 7th Street on Main Street. And it loops around, collects around to the hub site and to the south side of West Lane. And we've also added a water main during that construction to service the lots in behind on West Lane and the hub site. And then there's some associated work that we're going to be doing as well. There's a 6th Street water main connection that we'll be doing between Main Street and Fraser Street, and a little bit of sewer work to repair or work on and extend between Center Lane and Main Street. So in the Loring Way area, so far we haven't completed any of the construction activities. Public Works has started clearing some of the right of way for the sewer main that's in behind West Loring Way. So that's mostly completed. Now we're going to start looking at the internals and do some video work to take a look at what condition the sewer's in. We're planning to reline or reroute some of the sewer through the area and around the cemetery. At this point, we're not quite sure whether, which way we're going to be going. We do need a new sewer service that's going to service the fire hall site. We also currently are starting initial stages of looking at feasibility and design work for a water trunk main that comes from the 345 reservoir and the water treatment plant down Loring Way, crossing the highway, and it'll be carrying on down Main Street Highway 12 and connecting in at First Street. Okay, next slide. Okay, with that, is there any questions, comments?
I had,
How about,
when you just described the water going down Loring Way, crossing under the highway, and then going down the road, coming down into town, right? Oh, wow. Is that already there, or is this something new? Like, what's already there? Where does the water go right now?
The water, I'll use my moser just to point out where the water currently cascades down from the 3-4 reservoir. There is a raw water line that comes up from the wells down in the lower village. to the treatment plant, and from there goes to storage, and it cascades down to the 265 reservoir. Lisa, could you go back to the previous slide, please? Previous one for that? Okay, there. Okay, yeah, so the water the water feeds from the reservoir, 345 zone reservoir, cascades down to the 265 reservoir. From there, it's just distributed crossing at 4th Street there on the highway, and down top of 4th Street and down to Main Street. And it also feeds across towards 1st and across the railway and down to 1st Street. So there's 2 current feeds into the village right now. Well 1 as well, we're looking at completing an assessment on that well. It was the controls and the building were burnt up in the 2021 fire. So we're currently working on getting some new yield results and some water chemistry, and just evaluating it to see if we can reconnect that to the existing supply system.
So right now, the existing water line was under the CP rail in 2 different places. Is that correct?
Correct.
Wow.
We do have new, in 2018, 2019, there was new infrastructure put in. We have a new 8-inch water line that was installed under the highway, connects up on OTC. But all the older infrastructure, that's still the existing 6-inch, and it's probably, still probably in the 60s and 70s, I would think.
So how does the water feed Loring Way at this point? Just
Yeah, water from Loring Way. So water's pumped from the village. It's also can be fed from the intake. So typically when the turbidity is low, or we have, during drier periods in the summer, like August and September, we can't rely on the creek intake, so we have to use the wells. But typically most of the winter, as long as turbidity isn't too high, we can use the intake to feed the water treatment plant. And from there, it'll go down to the 265, or it'll go to storage in the 345. The 345 zone is what feeds the Loring Way subdivision area, the school, Kent Road, and the forestry area.
Oh, so where does that cross the highway? No.
It crosses if I can point it out on here, it crosses over, and just on the south side of the school, there is a crossing there. And then there's a line that runs across the school, the little laneway, crosses Highway 12, and then goes down to Kent Road.
Very good.
Through the water from the wells, it's pumped up to the treatment plant,
Yes.
so that's where it's chlorinated,
Yes.
and then it's fed back into the system.
Right. And it's
Is that cost efficient? Wouldn't it, I mean, how deep are the wells?
the wells are about I believe the pumps are about 20 meters below ground, and the groundwater level is about 13 meters, give or take. So fairly consistent. So there is a fair bit of energy that you have to pump it up. It's a long ways up to pump.
And what is the requirement for no chlorination is required for wells? Because there is, I believe there is a limit when your well is a certain depth. The water is considered pure. It doesn't have to be chlorinated. Maybe it's different for the municipal water. I guess I don't know.
Typically what's done is you get a hydrogeologist to evaluate the well and to see if it's under the influence of surface water. So there's certain criteria that would have to be met. Typically, chlorination is always used because you need a residual throughout your distribution system, because otherwise you can get bacteria growing in your system outside of past the treatment plant. So then it becomes an issue downstream in terms of potability for consumers.
So the lines themselves need to be disinfected.
Correct.
Correct.
And once they're disinfected, you think they would not require further disinfection? If the water is pure.
You water still, yeah, in the lines as it sits, the chlorine will decay. If it sits, it has long residence time, it will decay. And you can get bacteria regrowth in your system.
Okay.
So unless you treat the water as it's coming into your house with your own treatment system, which is very, very hard to administer,
Sure.
right? That's the only way you can get potable water to each home. So typically it's a chlorination of some sort in your lines. The system also has a UV system, so there's a double barrier in terms of for bacteria and viruses.
And back to my question about the cost effectiveness of pumping it up as opposed to setting up a chlorination plant for the wells that are down below and simply chlorinating those. My guess is they would require less chlorination than what's coming down the creek. And I'm just throwing that out as perhaps a cost saver on the long run.
Yeah, there's typically a different design philosophy inside the system. So looking over the years, there's different engineers that have been involved in the design of the system, and initial redesign reports looked at pumping the water from well 1, 2, and 3 up to the 265 zone, and then taking that water and boosting it up to the next reservoir. The design that was done by Opus, they decided to use a higher pressure system, so basically pumping it from the village, from the area of Alonzo Way, and pumping it up to the 265, or pumping it all the way up to the 345. So yeah, it's a little bit different design philosophy, but either way, you're still going to have to pump the water up to provide service to the Loring Way. It's not any way unless you can, unless you could have a sustained creek source or water in creek ground. There's not really any other way to do it.
And I recall those conversations back in 2018. And yeah, there's a lot of questions around how efficient, pumping water that far is going to be. We summed it up to that, we only fire up the wells when and if needed.
Right.
And so when turbidity hits a certain level and it's not acceptable, then the wells are fired up. I think in general, I haven't seen the stats, but I don't need to run the wells longer than 2 months out of a year, or do you know how often?
Yeah, typically August, September, and then periodic when we have, like, for example, when we have runoff and freshet,
Yeah.
and you might get turbidity spikes because we don't have filtration on the water plant. Then they'll swap they'll swap over to the wells. Because typically the turbidity in the wells is very, very low, and it's consistent. That's the nice thing about wells is that you do not have a lot of issues in terms of filtration that you have to deal with.
A lot of the new lift stations are actually really efficient when it comes to the power consumption, because they'll have one-way check valves to hold the pressure in it. So a lot of times they're extremely more efficient than what a lot of people realize. Like, I know back a while they ate cost. They weren't, but now the new setups and with the check valves and the flow meters, they're actually pretty efficient. I've been a part of quite a few lift stations and lift pump designs, pumping anything from 5 kilometers uphill to less, and they're a lot more efficient than what a person does realize in the general consensus. So that is one bonus, that the technology's come a long ways, and how they maintain the pressure overall makes a big difference on where the reservoir stays in its capacity as well.
There's no way you can introduce well water into the downtown service grouping without increasing the pressure. Is that I mean, if it was treated at the well, it was potable well, is there some way that you can just introduce it in the downtown core instead of taking all the way up and all the way down?
That's what was historically done, I think, and that's what the intent of well 1 was, when they installed that. And I think they used that locally and pumped directly into the village, the whole village system.
That is one way that it can be done, and that was actually one of the reports historically that was complete was that type of setup where water would be pumped up to just 265 reservoir, and then would cascade down to the lower village. So that's one way of doing it. You still need another zone and have to get water up to serve the next zone up and get water to the lower way area. So so you either do that through larger pumps down in the valley, pump it all the way up, or you pump locally from the lower village to the 265, and then you use a booster station that would pump it up to the next reservoir.
I'm just thinking this low, so it doesn't have the capacity for the whole village, but it might have the capacity for a segment, say above the number. I'm sure it's explored by many people, how to do it effectively up to some.
Yeah, the problem is that if you pump it up to 265, that's only servicing the areas below the highway. It's not, you still have IR-17 and the Loring Way area that we have to service and get water up there. So there's no way around it. It's one way to get it, we have to pump water up in times when we can't get creek. It's yeah, there's no other option unless there's another creek intake source that we could get. Yeah, so it's
Well, some engineer designed a system to pump water out of the tops of the river. Maybe you've run across that.
yeah, well, I actually worked for a company that actually did some of them, and they designed some of them back 25 years ago, and they're challenging.
Oh, yeah.
The Fraser River is very, very challenging.
Well, it was just
Yeah,
it's pretty full of brown stuff in the spring too.
that's right. And you also, look at the characteristics of the river if you're putting a river intake in. Like, you just have to go down to the boat ramp, see all the sedimentation and emulsion that you get there, seasonally. And right now, there's lots of sand that's deposited there that has to be removed. So can you imagine if you had to maintain that to keep your water intake free from that deposition?
Well, there actually was an intake installed on the Seattle Bridge Island. And that's where the intake was and the pump. But it didn't work. The engineering equipment might not have.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, anything is possible. Yeah, engineering wise, anything's possible with enough money. That's
Well, it was installed.
Very good. Well, we're on to some of the prompting questions. I'm gonna get some conversation started. And I think we covered off the first one pretty well, but what specific questions or concerns do you have about the existing and the proposed servicing infrastructure? I think we based on a few of those. The next one we have, what questions or concerns do you have about the existing and proposed community facilities? Those first initial 4 or 5 slides I've seen.
The first question first. The existing and proposed servicing infrastructure is a lot of it's replacing old stuff, correct? And the replacement is it being built to increase capacity or maintain capacity? Like, are we just doing the same, or are we building so that more potential users could be added in the future?
Yeah, typically when you're designing these projects, you always look at horizons for 20 years, 40 years. So for example, the existing trunk main that services the north side of the village and up to IR-18 originally was an 8-inch. It was installed very, very flat and actually below typical design hydraulic rates for capacity. But the new one we're putting in is we're going to be putting a 10-inch. So that'll serve, the community and IR-18 and beyond for, a long, long time into the future. I mean, anticipating probably like 40 years or more. So.
Can you give us an idea of what you've come across? Like, I know that the infrastructure in the ground is varied and people have patchworked it. And so you're seeing like clay pipe and different, just to give us a snapshot why we're kind of having to do all this, this important work here.
Yeah, there's two things. One is the age and the condition of the infrastructure, and also the capacity. So let's say, for example, for the sewer main, we've done we've videoed most of the sewer in the community. Most of it's old clay tile. So that's probably going back to the 60s and older when it was installed, maybe a bit into the 70s. But typically what we found in the lower village, there's a lot of areas where there's partial collapses and cracking, a lot of settlement in the lines. So there's a lot of areas where there's effluent ponding in the system. So the hydraulic capacity is compromised. There's also a fair bit of leakage through joints because I don't think with the settlement that's occurred in the lines, it's basically separated the joints. So we're getting a lot of probably bypassing. So effluent probably isn't making it all the way to the sewage treatment plant. So it's actually leaching into the ground and stuff. So the project that we're starting up probably the next few weeks is going to be, we'll be replacing most of that sewer main where the issues are. We found when we looked at the sewer main, when you start climbing up the hillside, generally the clay tile is in a little bit better shape. We're going to look at relining some of that sewer work. We've replaced some of it, but right now we're actively getting proposals to actually do some relining, and that will, if it's feasible and cost effective, it'll solve the problem in terms of capacity and longevity there.
Okay, perfect. I see Diane has her hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something and ask Daryl to maybe clarify a lot of the water improvements are pursuant to a grant that we had received to increase the fire flows of water to the village. And so, Daryl, I think in some of the work that we've done, my understanding is, we are building in some redundancy, and we also were replacing some restrictive infrastructure that we came across, small pipes or things like that. Is that correct?
Correct. So east of Main Street, the project we did last year, we had found when we investigated, we had a lot of very small water mains. So there was some old galvanized iron, I think 2 inches and less, that were used for main lines. Typically, main lines are no less than 4 inches in diameter. So you can think about if you have main lines in your village streets that are 2 inches and less, the challenge you're going to have with flows. And some of the stuff is actually very old. The cast iron's very old, so probably not too good shape, probably leaking a fair bit. Up at Station Road, we noted also there was actually some solvent welded pipe to, I think was 2 inch as a main line. So again, very problematic. Solvent welded pipe does not, over the long term underground, serve you well in terms of water. It starts to leak a fair bit through the joints and stuff. We also, there was, from some of the reports we've done recently in the last few years, that there was some identification of some flow restrictions up near the 265 reservoir. So we were looking in the fall of what that is and where that is, and we did a fair bit of field work and observation and testing, and we found that there was a closed valve at the 265 reservoir. So with that, we've remedied that, and actually the flows are actually quite good into the village now. The thing that we really have to look at in terms of, it'll be redundancy of service into the community. The two crossings that come into the village from the 265, we don't really know the age of them and the condition. So there's some concerns there of how long are they going to last, and how are we going to route them into the village? Because we have to cross highway, we have to cross a railway, right? So there's lots of challenges with that and cost. So the alternate option is bringing a line in from Main Street down from near the school area, and bring it down Main Street down the hill and tying it in near First Street. We would have to reduce the pressure. So because the pressure, if we were to have no pressure reducing valves from 3, 4, 5 zone, down to the village, we'd probably be running in the neighborhood of 200 PSI. So that's pretty high pressure. So that with that combination, we would still like to have at least one service coming down from the 265, because I think ultimately the village always wants to have some redundancy for resiliency in terms of supply. You don't want to rely on just one water main, because if something happens to that water main, you're out of water. So it's nice to have that redundancy of 2 or 3 lines coming into the village. So you've always got a supply of water.
That helps with like a closed loop type of thing too, right? To help keep the zones all pressured up adequately.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the soil condition around here? Is it an acidic soil, like that cathodic protection has to be run on?
No, typically I think it's very clean alluvial gravel, so so there's not a lot of fine material in it. So it's very, so if you dug a hole and put water in it, the water just disappears. So it's typically that finer material that it creates a lot of issues. So it's 2 things: dampness and the fine material that creates corrosion issues. So you tend to get a little bit longer lifespan in the drier, clean alluvial gravels.
I was just curious, I've done lots of water works like on the island and
Right.
on table sides and stuff. I'm pretty new to the excavation around this part, so I was just kind of curious what challenges are in that process.
Other communities, Kelowna, Campbell, they use cathodic protection for the most part, unless it's, ruled in a certain big. So, but your soils are totally different here than, Kamloops, you're getting lacustrine silts, and you're getting a lot of, clay silt, and then in the valley bottoms, you're actually getting just a fair bit of collapsible silts in certain areas too. So it varies a whole lot. Kamloops, we're here, it's fairly consistent from what I've seen
Yeah, I
across.
was just asking, like, up on the subdivision up there, it's all sand, right?
Yeah. There is, I've seen a bit of sand down by 4th Street when they were doing a little bit of work there, but mostly it's going to be like what you would call pit run gravel. Probably some larger rocks depending where you are. So
you were talking about lining sewer lines or water lines?
sewer lines.
And so, what's the expectation for that system to be? Or 20 years? 25
Well,
years?
that's right now we're doing investigation, getting some proposals on what that looks like. I actually haven't personally done anything with lining and stuff, so there's a fair bit of technology out there, but we need to get some proposals in and examine them and investigate and look at the costs. Because ultimately we want it to be cost effective as compared to putting in a totally new line, right? So we have other challenges when you're putting in actually excavating a sewer line. But based on the condition of what we see, particularly like east of Maine, where it's largely in pretty good condition. From what I've heard, lining is a very good option, but the staff is investigating what that would look like in terms of.
A test case.
Well, it could be a test case, but the thing is, we're trying to accelerate and get this work done, because ultimately we want to get the streets back to looking like the village of Lytton. So we want to get pavement, sidewalks, and everything else in, right? So we're really trying to push to get this stuff done. So.
And if I can just add it to the soil type, I think it might vary place to place, because I live just across the river from the village. But when we did a perk test, it was surprisingly slow. It was 25 minutes. I can't remember the volume and the size of the hole or whatever, but it seemed to
25 minutes? It's not, that's actually a good range.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's
Not too fast, not too slow. Yeah.
Wasn't too impressed. So.
It just makes your septic feel a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
So
I do have a question online. There's a question that says, I don't understand the need for the temporary housing portion of the community hub and the use of the EMCR funding. Is that a requirement of the EMCR, or is that a local priority identified through the engagement? What exactly is the village's role in managing housing for essential services, and how is essential services being defined in this context? I'm not sure if Diane or who would like to take that.
Yeah, I can answer that question. The housing isn't temporary; it's permanent. They're permanent apartments that'll be rented out. And when the initial conversations were held with what was then Infrastructure Canada, and provincial recovery staff as well, it was identified the fact that there is a limited amount of housing available in Lytton. And there was conversations within the community in some of our early engagement sessions, but also within the village, within around the council table, that there had historically been a shortage of places for people to rent. So it was all kind of all those things coming together. And then when EMCR provided the contribution agreement for the last recovery funding of 17.6 million, they included in it 3.1 million for essential services. Essential services is a term that is defined by EMCR. I don't have it right in front of me, but it was, we've looked into it on a different occasion, and it was specific for positions of like things like nurses, paramedics, medical personnel, that types of things, and other positions that are essential for the operation of the community. So they have provided that information to us. The final reason why the housing was considered for the hub site is as a revenue generator for the project itself.
Hey,
I'm just wondering, who are you?
Oh, I'm the village engineer.
I must have missed it at the beginning.
Oh,
You work for the village?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Village, Daryl, exactly.
Okay. Where does all this funding come from? Taxpayers?
No, there's grant funding. There's federal, provincial
Oh, good.
for the project.
Okay, thanks.
Town.
no, I have a bit of an out there comment or question. And one of my theories for providing long-term fire coverage for Lytton. Lytton has burned many times. And my theory goes something like this. I'll summarize it very quickly. Having perhaps a very large storage container somewhere in the vicinity of our reservoir up there, which are filled in the springtime with runoff water from the river, from Lytton Creek. And then it's gravity fed into the community in a separate line from our domestic water, but the downtown core is divided up into, say, 6 different zones, so that each zone is separated and would be electronically regulated, so that should there be a fire, those storage tanks would go to that zone, only to that zone. Everybody in town would have sprinklers on the roofs and deal with the fire one zone at a time. If it spreads to another zone or encompass 2, that it would have 2 zones. But it would be an immediate response to whatever the fire was, wherever it was. And it would not be chlorinated water necessarily. It could be water that basically has been stored during high water period when it be pumped. And I think that could go a long way and might be a trendsetter for communities in this dry interior as an idea for what could be done to prevent community from burning up. I mean, Littlewoods has the same kind of history as we do. They've lost their town many times as well. So just trying to get out how practical is this now to incorporate something like that. Of course, it's a different grant and everything else, but it could be a trendsetter for Lytton to show, hey, we have thought about this. We're tired of replacing our community. Here's what we think could work in our town. Comments?
Yeah, I think it's good to have conversations like that. The one thing, we did get a report from our committees, and they did look a little bit at that. And one of the challenges is the cost. It's quite costly. In my opinion, whenever you're doing an alternate system like that, I think it's a good idea to discuss it and really brainstorm it. But there's lots of things to look at in terms of how is it feasible. So from looking at land encumbrances. So how are you going to route water mains? How are you going to maintain, and what's your operational cost down the road? So how much of your operational capacity in your public works system is going to have to, for seasonally draining and so forth. Looking at issues like where can you site this? What are the geotechnical challenges and the geologic challenges wherever you're putting these large tanks? So there's lots of different things. So, I mean, you can study this. If you have, an unlimited amount of money to look at these things, you can look at them. On a local isolated scale, there may be opportunities for like tests, trials and stuff. And I know Warren at OLFN, for example, was talking about doing, some smaller tanks, in certain strategic locations just above the village, because it gives you a little bit of pressure, but also a quick response if you need to grab some water to put out just a grass fire or something. So, there's, having conversations like that, I think is good to, to really think about what is possible. It's just going to be costly to really, when you get down to look at it, and then to get, engineering, feasibility and review and approvals. So that's really probably going to be the challenge. Would be the cost.
I put sprinkler systems on my Chinese museum, so that was about $1,000 hit putting those in there. Obviously, it's dependent on your chlorinated village water, and at this point, I'd have to be down here to manually turn it on. But we're getting a bill, so I could do it from my phone if that was possible. But so I don't know if that's a viable option for some people. Like the same thing, maybe if some people would have done that on their houses, then fires usually come from that direction. So maybe those places can have their sprinkler on for a limited time. So mine may never be used. That means with the water pressure in town on a normal day, those 2 sprinklers will cover the whole building. Some of the road. Obviously, if we had a bunch of them going on at one time, we got an issue. But so I did that anyway, whether that will, be feasible or actual value at any point. But that system was easy to put in, with the build, and not very expensive.
We're seeing more and more people being proactive in mounting permanent sprinkler systems on their homes. I even just cruising social media the other day, a company popped up, and that's what they do. Very robust systems and give you a peace of mind. I know in general, and this a lot of this good conversation for next week's session, the emergency preparedness session.
Oh, yeah.
Coming up, but in general, like I know from how to plan a bit with Lytton First Nations, that we had a hard look at our reservoir sizes just to ensure that we had adequate amount of volume for fire flow, right? So that 45-minute, I think we only during the fire we achieved about 15 minutes of water, and now we're trying to get up to that 45 minutes to ensure that we have enough flow to build action fire. But well, it'd be interesting. I encourage folks to come out next week with some of those ideas and concepts that we can share with the group and start because who knows, maybe having sprinklers on your roof could help ease the minds of insurance companies and things like that, right? All these different little factors are going to add up and make a more holistic, a robust community in the long term. Yeah.
Interesting note, last fall when I was at Costco, they actually had these roof mounted sprinklers that you could buy a kit. Mm-hmm. So kind of when it gets to Costco level, it's starting to go a little bit mainstream, right?
Yeah, well, what I did is I just drilled holes into 4 corners. I had decks pretty much all the way around. So I drilled 4 holes, and then I just moved my garden sprinklers, with the spikes, just put them in the holes before we took off for Kamloops when the fire started. But I still don't know whether the fire burnt the water line first or whether it put out the sprinklers on the roof first, because there was burn marks in the lawn swing, which was sitting on the deck. Some of the fire people moved all the wood out and moved as much as they could out, but they didn't move the lawn swing. And there was burn marks on the lawn swing. So the fire came pretty close. I mean, we're lucky we our house was saved. And I think it was from the fact that I put up 4 sprinklers. But I don't know, maybe the water line burnt up above the house, burnt up first. And I couldn't get the fire people to tell me which way the fire was moving. It was all around our place. But yeah, I think it's a good idea to it doesn't take much. All you need is a sprinkler, and you could just mount it somewhere on, just be ready. Have the hole drilled or whatever so that you can move your lawn sprinkler to the house or whatever.
Mhm.
And I think, right, it's a good way you feel better because you know that when we took off the cameras, I thought my house was safe, but it came pretty close to burning down.
Mhm.
And we lost a motorhome and a car, a sauna, hot tub, change rooms, a dip tank. Probably $300,000 or $400,000 worth of stuff, but we managed to get $125,000 out of it. So, I said, I'll take the cash. You don't have to replace it.
We have a few more questions, and just before we move on, Dr. Chestnut, after question.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Is water line going to be very deep enough? Because I remember 40 years ago, there was an incident up top where the water line wasn't very deep enough and it froze. So somebody had egg over their face. The other question I have is the reservoir, is it adequate enough? Is it big enough? Has somebody studied that to look at the volume of water that's going to be in there and is it built to capacity? I have a third question. Can I have 3?
Sure.
This is a loaded question. How many Village of Lytton people are not coming back?
I can probably answer your first 2. Yeah, typically, I have actually, to be truthful, I have noticed in spots where water mains have been buried fairly shallow, historically here. And I've seen it actually in other locations like Kamloops. So it depends on the situation and, locations. So, but typically, like our current bylaws require that water mains have to be buried 6 feet deeper, 1.8 meters. So typically, yeah, they won't freeze at that depth. If you start seeing anything above 5 feet, 4 feet, depending where they're located, if they're in a road's going to be worse. But typically, you might see frost and freezing if you see a water main that's 4 or 5 feet deep. I remember years ago working in Port Coquitlam, and it was cold in the middle of winter. We're digging in a street, and it was, I think there was 4 feet of frost. It was cold for like 2 weeks, I think, in January, and there was 4 feet of frost in the ground. So it doesn't take a lot. So in terms of water storage, there's been a lot of discussion and reports to look at that. Generally, the reports are saying that we may be deficient of some storage. We want to look at it further. That is one of the projects that it's on our back burner. So we want to see how our grant funding goes through on the projects that we have coming up. But capacity of the reservoir is one of the things that we have under consideration.
Some general thoughts, in terms of engineering design requirements, in smaller communities, typically, you can put in fire sprinklers in buildings. And that typically reduces the hydraulic load and the amount of water flow you have to have fire hydrants. So, for example, the Loring Way system, I think the school has fire sprinkler systems. The Totem Motel doesn't. And the forestry building doesn't. So there's a couple of facilities there that perhaps if they had fire sprinklers, that might reduce the amount of water that we would have to flow at a hydrant during fire. Typically, I think it's always better to have more water than less. No doubt about it. It's nice. The challenge with treated potable water is you chlorinate it, and if there's too much water and the water doesn't circulate, then the chlorine dies. It dissipates, and so now you've got you're going back to that health issue where you may have water quality issues, and now the public works are going to your tap and taking a sample, and now we're failing or on a boil order or something because there's bacteria in the line. So that's if you're not using a lot of water, that's always a challenge when you have lots of storage potable water up on in storage reservoirs. But typically, yeah, it is nicer to have more storage than less. But it is something we also have on the horizon that we'd like to look at.
So this time though, there's 3 reservoirs, right?
There's-
The old one below the treatment reservoir. And then where the treatment is, and then 265, and they were added in 2017, I think. Those
The reservoirs were, I think, 2011 and 2012, and then I think the water line, the raw water, and the well completion of well 2 and 3, I think was 2018, 2019. I'd have to double check. You might be wrong there.
Yeah, I know I was on council when the 2 new reservoirs went in.
Okay.
I think it was a little bit later than that, but
It might have been. I might be thinking of some of the reports that were done. Yeah, it could be just a little bit later than.
so that almost tripled the original reservoir, didn't it? And there's no problem with chlorine content at this point. It gets turned over fast enough.
Yeah, typically, yeah, and that's right now the water in the village is fairly high because I think a lot of it has to do with water leakage. So typically, we don't see a lot of chlorine decay from dosing at the plant to tap. So I think typically they dose at about 1.2 to 1.5 parts per million, and typically I don't think they see anything much lower than 0.7. Typically, depends how much the residence time there is in the line.
Did they change those standards in the previous in recent years? Because my recollection is it used to be 0.5 to 0.75 was the ideal chlorination. I'm just saying that because a number of residents are feeling over chlorinated, and chlorination does have some adverse health effects, especially with people with lung or COPD or asthma or whatever. It aggravates that condition. So I know ideally we would like not to have mega doses, but we have to balance it with not poisoning people or making them sick, right?
Health concerns. Yeah.
So I think you're talking about looping the water system. And that might help modify the extremes in the chlorine residual we're getting. Is that true?
It depends on, you'd have to look at a case by case because it depends if you have a loop system, but there's no demand off of that system.
Because
there's still
people at the top of the system, they have somewhat resigned themselves to having a heavy chlorine dose. But I recall in the past, I remember one young mother telling me at one point, the chlorine's really high when your grape freshie is pink. And I know there's ways around it. I know you can pour it and leave it in the jug in a fridge overnight or whatever, but it is also a cost aside from being a health risk or aggravation. it's a substantial cost, the chlorine, bringing chlorine in, right?
Well, and the chlorine doses are generally going to be, they're going to dose at a level probably at the worst case scenario. So they'll look at the extremes of the system, and they want typically at least 0.2 parts per million at those locations, because that's the minimum. Otherwise, if you start seeing a lot less than that, health officers will start they're going to get up in arms about it. So yeah, so you may start out, so it depends on the chlorine demand through the system. One of the things, and this is another project that we, at some point would like to look at, is a filtration plant. Because, wells is not too much of an issue, but if you're on the creek, typically a lot of the organics and the immaterial, you're going to get a higher chlorine demand in that water. So if you dose, say, at 1.2 at the plant, maybe you're going to lose, probably 3/4 of that in residence time, and to your tap down in the lower village. So the more of the gunk you can get out of the water, the more you won't be using as much chlorine in the system, because the chlorine will bind with a lot of the organic material and stuff. So you lose that level of residual in the lines.
I'm just shooting for the perfect system, which I know is probably out of reach most times, but just for discussion, it's something that I've heard about it. I know myself, I have my own raw water system, so I can really smell the chlorine when I come into town.
Yeah, and the level they're dosing at is not that's pretty consistent with other municipalities too. I think city accountants is pretty consistent. They have a membrane plant downtown. I think they dose about 1.2, 1.3. And I know I've checked it where I live, and I'm kind of fairly far out, and I get about 0.7. So you lose about a half part per million in the travel time to get to the tap. So but that's not excessively high, and the guys at Public Works are checking the chlorine residual around the community regularly. So they do several tests all around the community every week. So
I know we've discussed it, and I'm confident that they're doing a good job. I'm just wishing for a lower count.
But every creek in VC is contaminated. This is what Irene told me. She said the health department considers every creek in BC to be contaminated with fecal contaminants. And that's kind of true, because I was hiking up above 7 Mile Creek one time, and there was a sheep's head laying in the creek. A sheep's head. How did that get there?
Right. All the variables of surface water, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had E. coli posters posted all around Gladwin at one point, right? Because of the mountain goats and their activity and above our watershed.
yeah, well, and crypto and giardia too. That's the two that you see in the creeks a lot, right? And they're a little bit harder to treat than bacteria. So.
Absolutely, yeah. So the importance of knowing our situation and doing adequate investigation into how we can improve things. So very thankful that we have Daryl helping with steering a lot of that stuff. So very good. Few more questions. We've got about 15 minutes left in our session. Of course, we're open to conversation. So what more does Lytton need to ensure local infrastructure is meeting the community needs? If yes, how should this be done, and what is important?
Are the cemeteries considered infrastructure? The 2 cemeteries, are they considered infrastructure?
I would believe so. There's planning around cemeteries, and
Yeah, because I think that one in town needs some work, hey? Yeah.
absolutely the Pioneer one. Yeah.
I think those guys up there are keeping an eye on things.
Yeah,
Diane may be able to answer better, but I think like there's a provincial law, I know you help me out here, that regulates cemetery interment, so you have to keep a register who's buried and where, and it's registered once that happens. So the one up top is like that. Pioneer Cemetery a number of years ago, when Dorothy was still with us, and I talked to John Hogan also. We were hoping that we could somehow map the Pioneer, because there's a lot of oral history that's getting lost. There's a lot of markers that have disappeared and now probably burnt.
Yeah.
And so that history is being lost, but at the time, Dorothy and John both said, it probably cost you a lot of money, because you probably need, what's the?
Ground penetrating radar.
Yeah, radar and a lot of research. So we were hoping we could get a grant to hire someone in archaeology or history, like a university student, to sort of facilitate that, but it didn't get anywhere.
But are there any
Are
there any records? Are there any records?
No.
there's to some degree, I've had this conversation early on in the fire recovery activities, stakeholder meetings. Tony Durant has actually said that when she worked for the tribal council, that they had documented that cemetery quite extensively with photos and had people, inquire with Tony again to see what level of documentation they did.
We have photos from, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, but some of the cement gravestones had already been moved up to the fence when I took those photos. But one person that you might refer to as Cotan Benson, the monks, because before, it must be 10 years ago now, he did a lot of work on that cemetery. He was hoping to find some funding so that it could be maintained better.
Yeah.
But and that's kind of his history's his thing. So that might be a good resource to ask what he has about it.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that's actually a piece of property belonging to the railway.
Railway, that's what I thought.
But I would suggest, I think First Nations would be the leaders in however they want to approach it, in that. Well, the only name I've ever heard was Chief Raffel, I believe.
Yep.
There's a Chief Raffel that's
Bandit.
there. And I think CN, it's on your right of way, but they built that retaining wall below the cemetery because bank was caving out and some remains so needed to be recovered.
Wanted to draw your attention to the community up from the riverbank. So I would presume the river's down here, but I have a problem with this here.
Yeah.
This will ignite and burn really quickly. I think we learned that from 2021. Because the fire came from south to north, and there was a lot of this at the other end of town. And it just went like that. So somehow, yeah, somebody had to look at this. Like the thing they painted it in for me. I guess they knew I was coming. This is an issue.
Duly noted, John. Thank you.
Sorry.
Like that, what's basically the status of that for volume and treating as you upgrade the downtown core here, the village was going from obviously to 10-inch pipe and stuff like that. And residents start moving back in. is it capable of managing? I know it was at one time, but once you increase the volume, what's that gonna look like? Is that gonna be on the radar for upgrade?
Well, typically the size of your plant is determined by your water usage. So the larger pipes shouldn't, because in your water storage reservoirs, there's a separate component allotted just for fire storage, so separate from the domestic. So typically it's not completely related to
Yeah, and I guess it was also kind of like, obviously the houses being replaced and rebuilt are larger than what original. Are they gonna have more inhabitants? So then what the treatment facility like down below, or sorry, the wastewater, I should have said wastewater, not water treatment, not for chlorination, but the wastewater, sorry. But the wastewater side of it, with the larger homes being built, if they're gonna have more inhabitants in them, what's that look like for?
Yeah, actually, sorry, I actually missed it.
That was me.
The point on the wastewater treatment plant, and actually we had a meeting earlier today on that, and we're actually expecting a report on the wastewater treatment plant because we're looking at the expansion requirements for that. So that's that we're going to be looking at that again. That's going to be a long-term population horizon capacity improvement. So looking at what are the improvement options. So we're actually anticipating that fairly quickly here in the next, to get a draft report probably within the week to look at what the improvement requirements are for the plant going forward for the long term.
So if I can just add to that, just because I got on council in 05, and 05, I believe, was the year that facility was commissioned.
Okay.
And it was supposed to have extra capacity, but our experience through running it through the years was it kept up with the current load that was here with the village before the fire. But there wasn't a lot of extra capacity because of that extra capacity that the airlines didn't have. It was overestimated. Its capacity was overestimated by the construction. Having said that, we had water meters for a little while. When water meters measured how much water was getting various houses. We could also measure what was coming out of the reservoir, what we were getting. How did that flow in a wastewater treatment plant? We didn't ever quite figure that out. So you have exploring because
Yeah, we were having a discussion about that amongst our design team today with our design team. One of the things that we don't know, that is just speculating, is, potentially there could be combined sewers at some point in some locations where maybe roof leaders are discharging into the sewer. So maybe that could, so they've actually graphed, they have wastewater treatment plant data, and they've graphed it from about, I think, 2009 to 2011. But then there's a gap where they didn't have any data, and then they have data again from about 2021 to now. So we're kind of looking all that data, but we're looking at what was the first part of the question you had there?
he was just wondering if the capacity was able to serve the larger houses with larger populations.
Right. Yeah. So we are going to be looking at long-term capacity of the plant and what the expansion would look like. Your first point was, yeah, and actually that was one of our discussion points at our meeting today, was that what they're seeing and what the design capacity, what they feel for each cell that we have, isn't really matching what the sticker was on the design. So they've identified that issue, and we're looking at, okay, well, what do we need to do to remedy that going into the future? So 5, 10, 20, 40 years out, what is that improvement? Are we going to do like a phase improvement? Are we going to do a complete full size improvement for like a long term? So they're just finalizing some of those details in some of the financial modeling that they're doing, and we'll be able to have a further discussion probably that we can present probably in the coming weeks.
I think I was being optimistic, right? Once people start seeing these beautiful buildings built, maybe everyone's in a rush to get back here type thing. Once they start seeing the growth and on the core thing, grocery stores and that type of stuff. It's gonna, like, I wouldn't see why they wouldn't want to rush back, right? There's already gorgeous homes built. Next thing you know, you throw the hub in there and stuff like that. People will see that growth, and I don't see why they wouldn't want to rush back. And last thing it would kind of suck to come back, and next thing you know, the wastewater treatment isn't stuff. But I know it's on it. I just was
So
questioning.
I think there is going to be a domino effect. I think once you get some of those core services, health, grocery store, a few more homes, hub services, now it's going to be like, okay, we want to move here now.
So that kind of-
you'll start seeing it.
Question, like, is everybody gonna come back? It won't be the same people coming back. But I think to have a viable community, there has to be a core of people to cover the expense of the services, right? And like you said, I think it'll be, once we get a grocery store and a place to have weddings and, yeah, it's really.
We talked a lot about the physical structures, but when we talk about capacity, we also talk about human capacity. And there's people that need to run all this stuff, that need to know how it runs. And how does that factor into all of the decisions that are being made? Like, you need a certified water specialist, level, whatever it is, and the sewer specialist, and you need to know your electronics. And then if you got something else, then you need something else. And then how long does it last? So all of that stuff, right? That's basically asset management, right? So how does all of that get put together and paid for out of the sewer and water fees that you collect? Because that's how it's gonna all get paid for. Right?
Right, yeah, so I came on and said, your basic framework of how you treat, supply and distribute your water is kind of here. Same with the sewage treatment plant, it's here, right? So it's an asset that's already here. So, I mean, if I'm starting greenfield, and especially in smaller communities, I always look for the simplest ways to, and I look at the operational. What are the operational impacts down the road? Usually about a 20-year horizon. Say estimate, what type of manpower do you need? What type of specialists do you need? Because that factors in. Because typically over the long haul, you will see that operational costs do add up quite significantly on your municipal infrastructure. So it's something you have to keep an eye on. But where we're at right now, you do need level 2 operators, and there's just no way of getting around that. So it's just making sure that you've got that operational capacity. And right now, we're fortunate to have somebody that's coming into the village that's a highly skilled operator that's really helping with the guys that are working here. So,
And that's going to change year after year because you're going to have new people. People are going to retire. People are going to quit.
You gotta find somebody that'll stay.
well, that's what I like getting the younger people and bringing them up. That's because what's the point of hiring somebody that's probably going to retire in 5 years? It's nice. Yet, maybe somebody can get the knowledge, but get people that are a bit younger to start training them up and getting them, going, because then they'll be here for the long term.
Well, and I think something that sometimes you forget when you're trying to but generally people forget when they're trying to create a system is the availability of the replacement parts and the availability to do self-repair. Because there's been times when you had to order from Norway to get a replacement part, and it takes months.
Well, we're seeing that with like the SCADA on the wastewater treatment plant, where we're going to be implementing SCADA, but like the PLC and all of it, you can't get parts for it anymore. It's it's only 20 years old, but you can't get the parts for it.
Anything
So
electronic, that's good.
Electronic. Yeah, even 10 years, it's like,
Yep.
Yeah, 10 years is almost like your horizon for being able to find parts.
So maybe sometimes a mechanical system takes more time, but it saves you in the long run.
I've been curious, Jim. You work for the band, right?
Development Corporation, yeah.
Development Corporation?
Yeah.
Are you kind of like a liaison person that you report to the band?
I'm an elected official for the band as an council. and I am a project liaison for the Development Corporation.
So, has the village got a liaison person that, no, somebody from the village? Or are you the liaison person for the village then?
That's not my title, no.
No.
Facilitation manager, so just helping to facilitate these community conversations through the official community plan.
I'm just curious because I've never been to a band council meeting. I think I might have been once. And they let me in, we're part of it, but then I had to leave because the conversation was private, right? So I'm just kind of wondering, it would be interesting, in my opinion, it would be interesting to see what's going on at the council meetings. You know, because it kind of gives us an idea of what you guys are talking about.
Absolutely.
And I think I think it's important that we both realize that we have a liaison person from the village that can go to a council meeting. You can always kick them out halfway through or whatever. But it would be interesting that we had some feedback from the council, what they're talking about. And then this is going to be more important in the future. And when you start to plan the surrounding areas, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that the Elephant Chief and Council in the village of Lytton communicate regularly and have meetings about mutual stuff. And I've seen village of Lytton people in our offices, you know.
Wow, yes, yeah.
And I never say, well, what are you doing here? No,
I pop in and say hi, John.
but it's part of the process. I mean, we're neighbors, you know, and we got to work together,
Yeah,
like it or not, you know.
yeah. We're equal partners, I think.
Yeah, and just one, before I do one final question, just a statement on that. I mean, both governance levels are have a desire to communicate and recognize the relationships that need to be and the amount of business that needs to get done. So we're still, you know, working our way through that, and hopefully, you know, things will improve and we'll have a dialogue that come out to community at large. So that's all on that topic. I'm not here as a politician tonight. The last and final question that I do want to ask the group is, are there any community facilities that are not identified that you would like to express interest in, or something that you know we haven't really particularly identified to incorporate into the OCP?
I don't know if this one fits part, but with the fires and obviously contamination of soil, which possibly here, there's a good chance of it. Soil treatment facility. Is there something within the community? Like, I don't know if it kind of, but to me, it's a rebuild of the infrastructure. Is there something, basically a compound? Like I've been part of building quite a few of them and treating soil down in Elk Valley on mine sites. And it's actually a lot simpler process after being a part of it than what I would have ever expected. But something in-house opposed to having to get rid of contaminated material at other landfills and land farms. Is it something that, like, I don't know to what level the soil would be contaminated and contaminated with what, but is that something that's been kind of discussed and talking about taking up the sanding line? What are you going to hit at that point, right? And is it something that's going to warrant needing treatment? And is it something that the village can do in-house and not have to pay the huge cost to truck it out?
Where were you 3 years ago? No, yeah, and I, you know, I could speak to that a bit too. Like, I mean, probably 90% of the lots in through the village and the First Nation itself that were impacted by the fire have been remediated and gone through rigorous environmental assessments, inspections, and testing. We're talking reports like, and majority of it was shipped out to landfill.
Yeah, I'm a little too late for that comment, I guess. I've just done drives and like with yourself and just areas have been identified as that's contaminated material. And I mean, even it goes, still puts a highway truck hits a ditch and fills the ditch full of diesel as contaminated. Like it always ends up with an additional cost that does affect the community as it's something that can be treated in-house. As a compound built and then released back once it comes back as a clean, non-contaminated soil, right?
Yeah, definitely there's pockets that haven't been cleaned up and developed and definitely worth the conversation. So I'd recommend, have a sidebar chat with Daryl and let him know some of your ideas and the process, and maybe that's something that we can recommend to the village to incorporate.
And anyone that doesn't know me, I'm an operations manager with Squamish Resource Management. So some of the team that's up overseeing the rebuilding the subdivision or building the new subdivision. And we are looking at obviously entering bids and stuff like that for the village of Lytton. So we're here full force to aid and support and help where we can with rebuilding it. And I come with 26 years of experience in the civil industry and been a part of a large group. So I joined them a month and a half ago. And first time in 15 years, I'm on a 5 and 2 shift and absolutely love coming down to Lytton to be a part of this management team and just supporting the project and getting to know everybody around here. So that's just so you know, like I'm not a permanent resident, but it's turning into a 50-50 for sure.
Awesome.
You should know that the regional government did not have any of those tests or restrictions. My place, I had a house burned down and I had quite a bit of the property burned down, and so did Glasgow's and TNRD never once wanted to do any testing. So I just pushed everything into the crawl space. And I covered it up with a foot of dirt, but it wasn't tested. I don't know what's down there.
But I've learned a lot over the years, and I definitely have a weighed in from outlook of those type of things and how it's going to affect our generations down the line and stuff like that, right? Like I remember when I started in the industry, the dirt and stuff wasn't treated near the same as what it's being treated nowadays, the environment overall. So I like the change for the good because I have kids and most likely they're going to have kids, at least one of the three might. And so I'm looking at big picture now. I definitely don't just look at my generation and that's that. I definitely look a lot further down the line.
Well, the reality is that our grandparents lived in houses that were predominantly wood and natural fibers and materials. We're surrounded by asbestos and plastic and kinds of heavy metals. Yeah.
But being an outsider and looking in on what was happening in town with all the restrictions and all that, I just thought that was nuts. That's what I thought. It's nuts.
Two extremes, one like super vigilant and one whatever, right?
And you'd think the TNRD would have been a little bit more vigilant because they're the main government area in this area is the TNRD. Yeah, I think so. It's a regional government whatever you want to call them. But anyway, I'm glad they didn't have any restrictions on us. Made it so much more easier. Just took everything to the dump. And the dump took it.
That's where everything ends up anyway.
What?
That's where everything ends up.
Yeah.
Oh, there are hoarders too. There are hoarders.
Yeah.
Never bring stuff to the dump. Accumulated. Where do I put this stuff? Oh, build another room. Fill that one up.
I'm gonna buy dead ponies here.
Are we digressing?
Jason, if you had any, if anything popped into your mind, like I went to big cities and I thought cultural centers and I thought arts and all that kind of stuff, and that's kind of big time for us, but I don't know what kind of facility, we're kind of talking about, what did you say? Community
Yeah, community infrastructure, yeah.
structure, yeah.
I think, you know, in my personal opinion, you guys are on, the village is on the right track. You know, we've got a number of parks that need, you know, some elbow grease and you know, and the community buildings, you've got the, you know, the foundational buildings plan, right? So village office, a community center and fire hall. I feel Lytton is on the right track.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Community or role.
Yeah. It's incorporated into the hub as well. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I didn't even catch that part of it.
Yeah, that was just in the first part of that presentation.
What we desperately need here, it would save 4 of us to drive to Boston Bar every Wednesday morning.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a big money maker.
You're gonna say a curling rink.
So basically, it's maintaining and sustaining the proposed facilities. To me, that's the important part. We've got big projects we're taking on, and we need to make sure that everything we do, right from the sewer and the water to the community hubs, is something that as time moves forward, the taxpayers of Lytton don't feel it's a burden, but it's something they're happy to be supporting.
That's huge.
I think the only other component that we probably would be missing, if we just mention it, would be the assisted living and continuous community living availability for all ages, but seniors and disabled in particular. And Chief Jordan and his health group seem to be moving that ahead on Front Street. So, you know, if we look ahead I hate to say 10 years, but I'm gonna say optimistic probably, and say we look ahead 10 years and those facilities are all up and running. The only other part of infrastructure that I think we all would want to have is nice sidewalks, curbing and lighting, so that it can be real walkable community.
Yeah.
And we can cut back on our need for parking spaces and lots of vehicle space, but make it more pedestrian friendly.
We had a recent discussion, actually following the committee of the whole, we were talking about, what type of street, typical sections can we look at? And we just actually earlier this week, we're talking about what some other communities are doing in terms of some of their village walks and stuff, where they have like a pedestrian corridor, but in the wintertime you can take out like barricades and stuff and it becomes a street. But in the summertime, you can put up barricades and different things to make it like pedestrian friendly walkthrough, with maybe shops and patios on both sides, that sort of thing. So you can almost have that like as a corridor on 4 that kind of funnels towards the hub, and you get people driving by and saying, geez, I gotta stop here and take a look, right? That,
Right? Patios get set up, basically like May long weekend, they get set up and they enter into the street, take up parking, and then they open up parking spots, like bigger gravel parking spots, and it basically becomes more of a walking town, like down Main Drag. There's less vehicles and more people walking and interacting, and then on Wednesday, they do like basically a city social night every Wednesday of like all through the whole summer break. And I was shocked at just the attendance and the morale. It was excitement and fun, and there's little musicians playing and kids crafts, and it definitely brought the community together. Like I've seen that. I mean, they didn't go through a big event, but I've seen moving around with my career, I've seen a lot of little towns do different things, and a lot of that's definitely stood out and just brings the community together.
And midweek's a good idea because everybody leaves town on the weekend.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I'd like to conclude our session here tonight. But I want to plant the seed that, you know, we do have an upcoming emergency preparedness session and that I had noticed while we were in the meeting, it may be pushed a little further into the end of March. So keep your ear open for when that's going to take place. And then also, I believe we'll be doing another final session on community identity. So that one is going to be crucial and important in helping to develop that vision for Lytton into the future. So again, thank you everybody for joining this community conversation and everybody in the hall, please do take some more food. We do have.
It's cold.
Excellent.
Like we have.
Well, thank you.